It started with hunger, not the kind that fades after a skipped breakfast, but the kind that eats at your mind. The gnawing emptiness of a soldier stranded miles from a supply line, staring at a can of cold beans he can't warm, and a winter wind that doesn't care. World War II wasn't just fought with rifles and tanks, it was fought with fire, and sometimes the lack of it. By late 1943, as American troops pushed deeper into Italy, across France, and through the Pacific jungles, a strange common thread united them all. Every man, from private to captain, became an improvised engineer. And one of the greatest unsung inventions of that war wasn't made in a factory or designed by generals. It was built out of trash, a discarded tin can, a pocket knife, and desperation. In the winter of 1944, Private Raymond Lewis of the 36th Infantry sat in a flooded foxhole on the Italian front. He'd been there for 3 days. The rain turned to sleet, his gloves were soaked through, and his rations, cold Spam, hard biscuits, and a can of beans, had frozen solid. He had matches, but no fire. The moment you struck one, the wind snatched it away. He needed warmth, not just to eat, but to live through the night. That's when Lewis remembered something an old mechanic back home had said before he shipped out. A man can make fire out of anything if he understands how air moves. He dug through his pack, found 2 empty ration tins, and began to work. That night, while machine guns rattled in the distance, he built the first thing that could keep him alive, a foxhole stove. It started as an accident. Across Europe, GIs had been experimenting with makeshift heaters since North Africa. They'd punch holes in empty cans, fill them with sand and gasoline, and light them, a crude but effective way to heat water or dry socks. But those stoves were dangerous. Too much fuel, and they exploded. Too little air, and they suffocated themselves. By late 1943, a more refined design began spreading soldier to soldier, passed like secret knowledge from one platoon to another. Some called it the buddy burner, others the foxhole furnace. But the mechanics were always the same: airflow, combustion, and control. You took 2 cans, one large, one small. The outer can was cut with air vents around the base. The inner can, filled with cardboard soaked in wax or fuel, became the burner. When lit, it produced a steady blue flame, hot enough to boil water, melt snow, or heat a can of stew in minutes. It was small, silent, and invisible to the enemy at night. No smoke, no sparks, no silhouette for a sniper to see. The genius of these stoves wasn't in complexity. It was in understanding physics under pressure. Soldiers discovered that a fire wasn't just about fuel. It was about airflow. A few holes at the bottom of a can allowed oxygen to feed the flame, while a few more near the top vented smoke and pulled in fresh air through convection. Essentially, these men had built miniature jet engines, crude, dirty, but perfectly efficient. Field manuals didn't mention them. Commanders didn't issue them. But by 1944, you could walk through any bivouac area from the Ardennes to the Philippines and see the flicker of those tiny blue flames hidden behind helmets and ration boxes. Wherever there was a GY in a can, there was heat. If you stood in a foxhole line outside Bastogne that winter, you might have heard a strange sound under the thunder of artillery, the soft clatter of tin cans, the hiss of wax catching fire, and the quiet murmur of men sharing warmth. They called it the Foxhole Café. Each stove was different. Some soldiers stacked 3 cans for extra draft. Others rigged wire supports to hold mess kits over the flames. Some even built chimneys using mortar tubes to vent smoke out of trenches. And in that frozen landscape, the smell of heated rations was almost sacred. One veteran recalled, "You could tell when a man had his stove going. The air smelled like life again, beans, coffee, and hope." Thousands of miles away, in the jungles of the Pacific, the same idea took on a different shape. The heat there wasn't the problem. Moisture was. Nothing dried. Matches molded over, and every campfire risked drawing enemy fire. So the Marines of Guadalcanal and Peleliu adapted the stove for stealth. They built smokeless cookers using ration tins, mud, and perforated bamboo tubes. They'd bury the can in the ground, run a bamboo pipe to the surface as a vent, and light it from a small slit. The fire stayed underground, invisible to Japanese patrols and aircraft. When the first flame caught and stayed hidden, men called it the Whispering Fire. You could cook rice, boil water for coffee, even dry socks without showing a single spark to the night. It's easy to underestimate how much science hides inside desperation. Every successful stove solved three critical problems: fuel control, airflow, and safety. And soldiers learned through trial and error that the best fuel wasn't gasoline. It was wax. Wax burned longer, cleaner, and safer. So they melted down candle stubs, poured the wax into cardboard rolls stuffed into small tins, and created one of the earliest versions of what modern campers now call solid fuel tablets. A single tin could burn for 30 minutes, enough to cook 2 meals or heat a canteen of water. If you added sand or dirt to the mix, you could even regulate the flame intensity. Without realizing it, those soldiers were doing what today's engineers call thermal optimization. The idea didn't stay American for long. British troops in Italy copied the design using biscuit tins. Canadian engineers improved it with folding wire stands. Even German prisoners of war held in U.S. camps built similar devices out of Red Cross tins and coffee cans. By 1945, the tin stove had become so widespread that Allied supply officers began issuing official versions, small metal heaters with adjustable vents modeled after what GIs had already been doing for years. But ask any veteran, and they'd tell you the official model never worked as well as the one they'd built themselves. There was something almost sacred in the act of making fire from waste, as if every spark carried a reminder that survival didn't come from orders or equipment, but from human invention. Private Lewis, the man who built his stove in Italy, wrote home weeks later. His letter survived in an archive in New Jersey. He wrote, "The nights are the worst. You can't sleep for the cold. But I've made a kind of heater from my ration cans. You light it slow, and it burns steady. I heat my beans and melt snow for water. I even made coffee tonight. It felt like civilization." Those words capture something more than ingenuity. They capture the core of resilience, the will to make warmth out of nothing. When you're freezing, hungry, and alone, a tin can isn't garbage, it's salvation. When the war ended, the field stove quietly followed soldiers home. Veterans brought the idea with them to farms, camps, and construction sites. Boy Scout manuals in the late 1940s began, including a version called the Hobo Stove. In the 1950s, outdoor magazines rebranded it as the Wilderness Burner. And to this day, survival instructors still teach the same method: a tin can, a few holes, and a small flame. Modern campers buy titanium stoves for hundreds of dollars. But the old soldiers would smile and say, "Son, we did it with trash and lived to tell the tale." In the end, the tin can stove was never about cooking. It was about control. In a world where everything was chaos, artillery, hunger, cold, the ability to make a small, steady flame meant control over your fate. Fire gave warmth, yes, but it also gave order. It gave hope. And maybe that's why, in every photograph of a GI at rest, you can almost imagine a faint glow below him, a hidden flame, burning in a cut-up ration can, casting light on a war fought not just with bullets, but with human will. Today, if you walk through the battlefields of Europe, you can still find them. Rusted tin cans, their sides punctured with perfect round holes, sitting half buried in the soil. To most, they look like garbage. To a historian, they're artifacts of survival. Each one tells the same story, of a man far from home, freezing, hungry, exhausted, who refused to surrender to the cold. He found a way to make warmth from ruin, to build comfort from debris, to create life from waste. And that, in the end, was what victory was made of. Not just battles won, but moments endured, moments where a single spark, born in the belly of a tin can, kept hope alive in the darkest nights of war.